Hey y'all, welcome to my channel Reviewed, where we talk about all things television and film from today and yesteryear. So I wanted to come on here and talk about the recent episode of Interview with a Vampire Season 2, Episode 7. The name of the episode is I Cannot Prevent It. Y'all, this episode was so good. It had me all in my feelings. Like, I have not felt this way about a vampire since the originals. And when I tell you their acting on this episode was completely outstanding, they are phenomenal actors anyway, but this episode, they really just gave it their all. And I'm telling you, if this is the lead up to the season finale, I don't know what I'm gonna do with the season finale because I'm telling you, this had me in my feelings. As you can see on the screen here, we have the playbill of what is going on with Louis, Claudia, and poor Madeline. Poor Maddie, she just caught a stray. I feel so sorry for her. But let's get into this episode. So, as we get into the episode, Daniel, Armand, and Louis are talking. Daniel is asking Louis about the kidnapping. And as y'all can see, Armand got his head down, and quiet as it's kept, he going to have his head down quite a bit in this episode because he's the one who chose violence, okay? And so, as Louis starts going into detail about the kidnapping with Daniel, Daniel interrupts him and he was like, so basically, Armand set you up. And Louis was like, I'm talking. And so Daniel was like, okay, continue, my bad. And he lets Daniel know that at the time of the kidnapping, the main thing he was trying to focus on was his hearing. He said he wanted to make sure he could still hear Claudia to make sure that she was still alive. And let me say this, I did not appreciate Santiago goons throwing Louis down them steps like that and doing an A-town stomp on him like he wasn't nothing. And y'all, they put Claudia in that pit with those rats, and that scream she hurled out. Louis also tells Daniel, he said that he could hear when the rats started to nibble on Claudia's flesh. It was just crazy. And so here we have Santiago. He is showing a display of diaries that they collected from Claudia. He's showing it to the audience. And so they bring out Louis, Claudia, and Madeline on stage. And if you can see the little picture at the top, they cut the back of their ankles because they were basically trying to make sure that they could not run away. And Louis keeps staring at this chair. He says that he could smell a familiar scent, but he still was not certain as to what was going on and why they were sitting in front of that audience like they were. And in walks Lestat de Leon Court. When Santiago is introducing him to the audience and we see Lestat walk backstage before he hits the actual stage, the way he threw off that jacket, honey, he was like, oh yes, y'all about to get it, so get ready, okay? And so as Louis is sitting telling Daniel about Lestat's entrance, Daniel interrupts and he goes, so your new boo, Armand, sold you out to your old boo Lestat, and now y'all sitting on stage basically waiting for the court of public opinion. When he said that, I hollered because at this point, Daniel is not feeling Armand at all. He thinks Armand is trash. And in so many words, in this moment and what led up to it, he is kind of trash because he basically sold them down the river. And now they are in a conundrum that at this point, neither one of them can get out of. So Lestat, he's out there on stage, and Santiago has him like swear his hand on this book or diary that was written in his blood, basically like he's swearing to a judge to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. And Lestat sits in his seat and he said, it's time for them to hurt. Like it's time for y'all to pay up for what y'all did to me. And this is Lestat just looking gored. I just wanted to show that. Okay. So here we get Louis telling Daniel that when Lestat was talking, he looked over to see where Armand was. And Armand, of course, was sitting there watching everything unfold. And so Daniel was like, so wait a minute. Not only do you turn them in, but you're watching their demise. And Armand was like, I was forced to watch. And he was like, so what was the alternative? And he was like, either I was going to watch what happened to them or they were going to get rid of me. So it is what it is. So Santiago and his henchmen are basically running the show. As you can see, they're the ones down in the little judge uniforms. They're also the musicians and the projection screen controllers of some of the cartoons that's going to go along with the story when Lestat is telling his story or whatnot. And when I tell you Santiago is enjoying every minute, he is literally enjoying every minute. He cannot wait to see the demise of Louis, Claudia, and Madeline. But one thing I like is that Lestat let Santiago know every chance that he get that you may have written the play, but I'm the one running the show. When I tell you, Santiago, he told Lestat, he was like, so let's talk about your story of burden. And Lestat said, no, it's not a story of burden. It's a story about love. Don't play with me. Okay. So Louis begins telling his story. He starts off saying he was never really lucky when it came to love, and he goes into a story about his first guy that he used to date, and then he goes and he starts to let people know that he decided to go to New Orleans, and that's when he met Louis. Now, the way that he tells the story, he makes it seem like Louis was after him. He basically says, I am a vampire, but I was the one being hunted. And he makes it seem like Louis was the one who was after him. Like every time they would meet up, it wasn't necessarily a coincidence. It was like Louis was basically tracking him and trying to get with him. So while he's telling that story, of course, Claudia was like, he's lying. And Louis also defends himself. He was like, I never told you that. That's what you used to say to me. Those are things you used to say to me. And so when Claudia and Louis are objectifying what Lestat is saying, the henchmen who work for Santiago, they do that thing with their mind where they're control their mind and causing them pain. Um, and as you can see up here, Armand, he's very somber because he has to watch all this stuff unfold. And Santiago, he goes into the story about how Lestat and Louis first sealed the deal, I guess. And he's making it seem like Louis basically forced Lestat's hand, which again, I don't recall any of that, but that's basically how they're making it seem. Okay. And so while Lestat is sitting talking to the audience and telling them of he and Louis' love story, some idiot in the audience makes a homophobic slur, and immediately Lestat pops up behind him. Now, to me, I'm like, these people do not understand or realize that this stuff is real. Like the audience looks up and they just see Lestat basically going off on the man in a real nice, nasty way. But I'm like, has it not clicked in anybody's head that this is actually real? I guess they think they all a bunch of magicians because no one seems to be phased at the fact that Lestat was just standing on stage and then all of a sudden he's behind this gentleman and then boom, he's back on stage again. Just crazy. So this is just a little scene where they were talking about how Louis refused to, indulge on human blood when he was first turned by Lestat, and they were just talking about how he preferred to go after animals versus humans. And not long after they start discussing how, what Louis preferred to do once he was turned, then they segue over into how Claudia was brought into the mix. And so, as you can see, there's a little cartoon of Claudia in the background. And these words here were at the bottom were from one of her diaries. And so, Madeline, when she hears Claudia's name, she kind of comes to a little bit. It seems like she is completely out of it through the episode, but for whatever reason, when she hears them bring up Claudia's name, um, she kind of comes to, and Santiago goes and says something to her to basically calm her back down. It's like she's just completely zoned out. So the story about how Claudia was made ends up unfolding, and Louis and Lestat are bumping heads. Um, Lestat basically told Louis that you do not turn kids. He was like, we don't give children the gift. And of course, this is he after Louis finds Claudia in that home that had burned down. And so he's like, she's a little girl. She thought I was an angel. He really wants Lestat to save her. And Lestat was like, that's just something we do not do. He said, we do not want to turn a 14-year-old. He said, she's going to stay in a 14-year-old body forever, but her spirit and everything else is going to mature. But she will be trapped. He said, we don't turn kids. But Louis wasn't hearing it. And so they were going back and forth arguing. And that's just Claudia's, her expression on her face when she's listening, and she actually leans over and asks Louis, is any of that true? And so here we have Louis, he drags Claudia's body off of the bed, and this is him pleading once again with Lestat to turn her. And Lestat is like, no, you know, you don't want to do that. We're not going to do that. And he was like, you just want somebody to be your lapdog. And Louis was like, no, she could be our daughter. She could be our daughter. And he was like, if you just do this for me, I promise I'll never leave you again. Louis tells Lestat, he was like, I will never leave you again. I will never hurt you. I will never leave you lonely again. I will never make you feel that feeling again. And so he is pleading. And while Lestat is, talking to him and telling the story to the audience, so as Lestat is telling this story, he walks into the audience and he asks the audience member to hold his hand. And he said, this is the type of loneliness he said that he would never have me feel again. And basically, the loneliness of a vampire is like 10 times worse than the loneliness of an actual human being, because the look that the audience member has on his face once he feels what Lestat is trying to convey, it was crazy. It was as if it was just an insurmountable feeling. And he even yells on stage to Louis, you should be ashamed of yourself, something to that effect. So Louis, he basically, he cuts his wrist and he tries to feed Claudia the blood. It does not work. So they are at their wits' end, and finally Lestat gives in. But before he does, he tells Louis, he said, this, you are going to regret this. This is going to be one of the worst mistakes of your life. You're going to regret this. But he ends up going ahead and turning Claudia. And so, as Louis is sitting talking to Daniel and Armand, he has a hallucination of Lestat, which brings him into the presence. And he's basically saying to Lestat that he does not remember Lestat being so vocal and saying those things about why they should not turn Claudia. Ultimately, also, uh, Louis tells Daniel to put Lestat's account of how Claudia was turned in the book versus his, because he was like, clearly his memory and his judgment was cloudy. And so he tells Daniel, it's best to put Lestat's side of the story about how Claudia was turned in the book versus mine. And so this scene here is when Lestat is talking about, after he turned Claudia, how she was basically running amok all over the place. Like, she was biting up on everybody and she did not care. It was almost like she was not covering her tracks, which put other people on Lestat and Louis' trail, because she was just very careless and reckless, which was something that Lestat was concerned about because she was young. And I guess the urges that one gets when they turn, is just overwhelming for an adult. So it has to be times 10 when it comes to a child. So right here is when Lestat is telling the audience about when Claudia ended up leaving, when she wanted to go find others like her, and just basically go out on her own and figure out the world. So he lets the audience know that this is when he and Louis' relationship basically started to crumble, and that Louis blamed himself for Claudia leaving. And throughout the years and all the time that she was gone, it was just a bunch of vitriol. And he was like, imagine being with someone for 7 years who doesn't even want to share themselves with you anymore. He was like, he didn't want me to touch him. And every time he talked to me, it was out of anger, and he was disgruntled all the time. And Lestat basically was saying, what else was there for me to do but to take on another lover? And of course, eventually Claudia does come back. And y'all, I forgot about that huge fight that Lestat and Louis had in season one. So, in this point of the episode, they are going to do a couple of flashbacks to that particular fight. And I forgot how brutal that fight was. Like, Lestat's face was so bloody, Louis' face was jacked up and bloody, and they showed how Lestat kept telling Louis to calm down, and he was like showing so much restraint because he was like, I don't want to hurt you, Louis. But Louis was so angry and he was so upset. And it also brought me back to just how Claudia was in season one. We all know Claudia's a brat. She's a kid. She wants all the attention. She's me, 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 me. But it also made me think about and remember how jealous she was of Lestat and Louis' relationship. Like, she wanted Louis to choose her to prove to her that Louis loved her more than she loved Lestat. And, you know, Claudia, her interactions with Lestat would be just presented with such cantankerous energy. It's like she just couldn't stand him. And it was just because she was just jealous of that bond that they had, even though Lestat and Louis were not in the best place, it was still an attachment there. And a part of me feels like it was because Louis had some type of dependency on Lestat. He didn't need him, but it was just something there that he could not let go of. And I think once Claudia came back into the picture after all that time, that was his way out. That kind of gave him a little bit of strength. But if you think about it, all the times that he thought about Lestat this season, it was almost like it was giving him some type of comfort. But so in this scene where you see Louis' hand, he's basically telling Lestat, I'm gonna choke you out just like you did our daughter until your eyes pop out of your head. I'm gonna cut your head off and feed it to the lions and laugh. And he does this egregious laugh, you guys. I was like, wow. But Lestat asked him, he was like, you're gonna leave me? He was like, you're going to leave me for her, because Claudia wanted Louis to go to Europe with her. And that's where that fight came from. And once Lestat could no longer hold all that rage in, which he was trying to, that's when he, grabs Louis and he flies him all the way up in the air and he drops him. And so when he starts to talk about the drop, he gets so emotional, and this is just where my feelings, I was like, oh my gosh, Lestat was so emotional, y'all. It was pretty heavy scene. It was pretty heavy. And so while Lestat is crying and having these emotional moments, Santiago says, well, what did that feel like when you dropped him? He said, Lestat was like, it didn't make me feel good. He was like, I broke him. He said, I know that I broke him. I did that to him. And he said, I dropped him and basically watched him grasp for air. He said, I wanted to hurt him because he did not love me the way that I loved him. And he was like, that's pretty much what it was. He could not get that same love in return that he felt like he was given to Louis. And he ends up turning to Louis and he says to him, I've thought about this a lot. He said, while I was laying in that coffin that you left me in. And I was like, honey, leave it to Lestat to have a heartfelt moment, but still let you know I ain't forgot about what you did, which is why we're here. But anyway, he pretty much apologizes to Louis. And he also says something to the effect of he's not worthy of Louis' forgiveness. And even though he seems to be sincere, Claudia looks at Louis and she's like, don't fall for it. He's still trying to hurt you again. Do not fall for the okey doke. Okay. And so we get a scene with Daniel. He asked Louis, he was like, well, did you fall for it? How was that apology for you coming from Lestat? And Louis was like, this man flew all the way over the ocean to watch us be punished for what we did to him. And then he does a beeline and he gives us this whole spiel of emotions. And Louis basically was like, but that's Lestat. That's just how he is. And Armand co-signs it. And Louis tells Daniel, he said, it didn't have an effect on me. He said, because at that point I was immune to it. He said, if I'm being honest, the only thing I was concerned about in that moment is what was going to happen to me. He said, the only person that whole speech moved was Claudia. So Claudia stands up and she says to Lestat, "You dropped this man like an egg." She's like, "You basically tried to throw this man away." And then she turns to the audience and she says, "So if I cry and I say I'm sorry, will I be forgiven too?" She was like, "Come on." And she is basically fed up. And she also says to Lestat, she was like, "I don't even know why I bothered with you." She said, "You only came here because you want another round of romance with Louis." And she was like, she's tired of it. She's like, "It was never gonna be me. You were never gonna choose me over him." And she also says to Louis, she was like, she felt like she was basically a shingle on Louis's roof that flew off. And she's just tired. And I think at this point, she knows that she might as well get what she needs to get off her chest, because ultimately the end is near for her. So as Claudia walks back to her seat and sits down, Madeline, she just says, "Are we on trial?" And the whimper in her voice, and almost like the childlike innocent sound in her voice, because she was completely out of it. I felt so sorry for her, because it's like she chose this life, um and now it's basically put her in a position to where she's going to lose hers. So she stands up in front of the audience. Santiago starts calling them one by one to face the judgment by the audience. And they tell Madeline that she can either join them, the coven, or she can die. And so Madeline looks behind her and Claudia looks up to her, and Claudia is telling her to choose the coven. And Madeline turns to the audience. She was like, "Claudia is my companion. That is where I want to be." And of course, they find her guilty. So now it's Claudia's turn to face judgment by the audience. And while Santiago is going through the whole spiel, Claudia is being very observant about everyone that is sitting in the audience. She is just paying attention to everybody. She's looking at all their faces. And of course, they end up finding her guilty. And so after she's found guilty, she's like, "Can I have one last request?" And Santiago was like, "No." And then Lestat was like, "No, yes, she can have it. Let her have it." So she stands there and she is looking out into the audience, and she points at this man in the audience who has on a top hat. He's sitting in the balcony, and she says, "Sir, can you remove your hat?" And he takes his hat off. And then she stands there and says with her whole chest to the audience, she's like, "I know what every single one of y'all look like. I know all y'all faces." She said, "If there is an afterlife, I'm coming and I'm going to kill every single last one of you mother effers." And she said, "Even if there is not an afterlife, I'm still going to kill all y'all." She basically was letting them know it was up and it was stuck at that point. She knew what was about to happen, and she was going out like a straight up G. Okay. Of course, now it is Louis' turn to be judged by the audience. Um, they do find him guilty. But what ends up happening is, if I don't know if y'all can see this picture well of Armand, his eyes are like bugging out of his head. He basically compels the whole audience to pick banishment for Louis versus death. Like he is working overtime, and the whole audience basically is compelled by him, and they all say banishment. That's what they choose. So Daniel, he looks at Louis and he says, "So he saved you?" And Louis was like, "Yeah." Our mom was like, "Yeah, it took everything out of me. It just took a lot out of me to do that." And Daniel was like, "Well, why didn't you save Madeline and Claudia?" And he said, "I could not prevent it." He was like, there was nothing he could do to prevent that. And here is where we get the ending of Claudia and Madeline. And before this actually happens, Santiago says to the audience, "Remember that everything that you see here tonight is not real. This is all entertainment," basically, is what he's saying. And they go along with it. And so Santiago leaves the stage, and they open up whatever at the rooftop, and the sunlight comes in, and it begins to burn Madeline and Claudia. Claudia, she is basically holding on. I think she starts singing a song, and Madeline, she is moaning, she's in pain or whatnot, and she finally just completely dissipates into the ashes. She dies before Claudia does. So while Claudia's body is burning and she's turning into the ashes, she turns and looks at Lestat. And she's saying these things, they're kind of inaudible, but it's almost as if she's like, if my voice got to be the last thing that you got to hear before I'm up out of here, then so be it. So she's looking at him, and she's looking at the person that created her. And the person that created her is the last person that she sees before she dies. And so they zoom in on Lestat's face, and it made me pause because I wasn't sure how to feel about it, because it's like he's looking at her, but I don't know if he feels satisfaction or if he's looking at her out of remorse or if he's just indifferent, because his eyes get very watery. But it's just like it left me speechless, you know? And her body just completely diminishes into the ashes. And Santiago walks out on stage and he picks up her dress. And that was the end of it. Now, while everything is transpiring on stage with Claudia and Madeline, the coven had took Louis backstage and they placed him in this box and they started pouring all these rocks on him. They basically submerge him in these rocks and cover him up, and they stick him in a tomb in the wall. And that is where the episode ended. Listen, y'all, so much happened in this episode. Like I said, the acting was phenomenal in this episode. I do not know how I'm going to be able to receive or handle the season finale when this episode, to me, is going to be kind of hard to follow up, even though I know they will be able to do it. Um, well, Claudia's gone. Maddie caught a stray. Armand feeling guilty. Lestat is on one. Louis is under some rocks. So I guess we shall find out next week what happens. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for listening. Please leave a comment and let me know what you thought about this episode. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you. Bye.